A very good morning to you. Welcome to the UK Finance webinar channel, where we discuss the latest issues impacting and affecting regulated firms alongside subject matter experts in their field. My name is Philip Allen. I'm the Director of Learning at UK Finance, and today for the next hour to discuss using voice technology to achieve MIFID II compliance, I'm delighted to be joined by associate member firm Spitch, especially Brian Martin, UK and Ireland Director at Spitch, Sean Donoghue, who's the Principal Consultant at Spitch. Just before I hand over to Brian, I'll cover off a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets which you can use. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these during the webinar, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later by Brian and Sean and his colleagues who are participating in this conference webinar later on by email. Please note that when you ask a question, your name and your organisation is not disclosed to any other webinar attendees. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list widget in the green folder at the bottom of your screen. If you want to contact the presenters directly, please click on the mail envelope next to the presenter's photo. To the right of the resource list, you'll also notice a number of other icons. If you just want to click on those, you can actually ask for help. You can also email the presenters directly, or as I said before, you can download a slide deck as well. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. As I said, if you have any technical difficulties, please click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers the most common technical issues. An on-demand version of the webinar will be available at the end of today and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. We intend to present for around about 30-35 minutes and then answer your questions for the remainder of time. Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Philip. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this UK Finance and Spitch webinar. My name is Brian Martin, and I'm the Director of Spitch in the UK and Ireland. I only slightly surpass Sean's experience, having been in the markets for more than 30 years. My experience spans many leading global firms within the international banking and finance community, coupled with some extensive software experience within FTSE 100 companies. Presenting this morning alongside me is my colleague Sean Donoghue. Sean has a distinguished background in regulatory compliance and has been working globally with some of the most respected clients in financial services, where he has been consulting and advising on how to deploy technology to achieve compliance whilst mitigating risk and fraud across a plethora of change programs. As MIFID II draws closer, despite a 12-month delay, on the 3rd of January 2018, MIFID II will be implemented Europe-wide. At this point, several highly respected surveys, most recently from Duff & Phelps, which surveyed a panel of senior financial officials, tell us that many companies, as low as 36%, are confident that they will be ready to comply with MIFID II, which at this stage is now less than a month away. With a one-year delay having been provided to allow firms to finalise their preparations, any further extension is now not an option. This leaves the realistic potential for sizable fines and for more than 60% of in-scope firms that do not expect that they will be compliant within the new regulation come January the 3rd. MIFID II is extremely detailed and very far-reaching. So given time parameters, we have decided to focus on the most important and pressing issues that almost all respondents have signalled as being an issue, which is Article 16.7, which covers the enhanced call recording requirements. Looking at the full attendees this morning, this would further demonstrate the importance of this area to the attendees for MIFID II. We very much hope you find this considerable value in today's presentation. So, the objective of the webinar will be to talk about what has typically been a laborious, time-consuming and costly process, which can now be fully automated, creating such efficiencies that give total control and insight over 100% of interactions. This has been achieved by adopting and implementing highly innovative speech technologies that are tailored to the individual needs of businesses, which in turn provide full compliance with MIFID II Article 16(7). Organisations affected by MIFID II will be required to record all electronic communications, as well as in-person meetings and telephone calls. This needs to be done for communications relating both to actual or possible transactions for clients and on the firm's own account. Record keeping will be vital. Records will have to be kept for a minimum of 5 years, and in some cases 7 years, or for the duration of the client relationships. We are hearing that many telecom providers are unable to provide the required solutions, so we will look at how plug-and-play technology that is easy to implement addresses these issues for many firms. Taking a look at today's agenda, MIFID II introduces for the first time an EU-wide harmonised requirement on firms to record telephone conversations and electronic communications relating to or intended to relate to transactions concluded when dealing on own account and, as previously mentioned, when providing client order services that relate to the reception, transmission and execution of orders. Here in the UK, this will replace the FCA's domestic taping regime that has been in place since 2009, with similar changes across Europe. We will then look at affected firms, with much more in-scope firms being added, many of which have no call recording facilities at all. As we work through the webinar, we will look at historical processes and what the vast majority of firms are still doing today. And more importantly, if those existing processes can be carried over and be sufficient for the application of Article 16.7. Having looked at this, we will then look at how new initiative voice solutions are addressed and are addressing specific business needs in a changing environment as regards with regulatory compliance, especially focused on MIFID II. But these technologies have a much wider application for business needs with tremendous business benefits for firms, their clients and regulators. So I'm just going to hand over. We will then show you the management console and a dashboard view as an example of how the solution might look. These are set up around the specific needs of firms and are tailored to businesses individually. For example, wealth management, credit card companies or trading focused companies. Having looked at MIFID II, those affected the existing processes and the inherently laborious and costly processes, new innovations and how they look. We will take an in-depth look at many of the benefits presented by adoption of these new voice solutions and what firms are currently experiencing from adoption of similar solutions. Finishing with some conclusions before we open up to take some questions from you or our attendees. We have some additional colleagues with us from our European offices that may be able to share some insight for local firms if you are based outside of the UK. Philip, can we have the poll question, please?
Yeah. Okay. Just a very simple poll question. Is your organisation fully prepared for the regulatory requirements of MIFID II Article 16(7)? Is your organisation fully prepared for the regulatory requirements of MIFID II Article 16(7)? There. And if you can just indicate by clicking on one of the options that you see listed below, that will actually give us an understanding of where you're at, and then we can discuss that in the round there. So is your organisation fully prepared for the regulatory requirements of MIFID II? Right. Okay. Our great esteemed panel here said yes. 11% said yes, we'll be ready. 44% said, well, no, unlikely to be ready. No, I don't know the requirements of, well, 44% don't know the requirements. Okay. Wow, okay.
Okay, so Sean, on the basis of that question, what is MIFID II and why is it important?
Okay, thanks Brian. Good morning everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Just to finalise off the back of the question, this is probably typical of what we see. Most of what we're going to talk about through this presentation will speak to the last two. That's the no unlikely to be ready, and the no I do not know what the requirements of 16.7 are. As we know, and leading in, the MIFID II is the new requirements. Well, it's the Market and Financial Instruments Directive, and it sets out rules for EU financial firms and institutions to record and monitor all order-related transactions. Essentially, this will extend and reform the original MIFID framework, which was originally designed for the equities market and implemented back in 2007. Whereas MIFID I was aimed at creating a single European market in equities trading, MIFID II is a response to the financial crisis. So, why? The aim is to to restore investor confidence after that financial crisis, and the objective is to make the market safer, more transparent, and more efficient. So, we see it, and I think everyone does, as transforming financial markets right across Europe. It will do this indirectly, stipulating new practices by all market participants. The more profound effects will be indirect, and by increasing automation and transparency, MIFID II will change the economics of financial services and securities trading, hence the business models of many of market participants. New data management and analysis capabilities will be required. This has been a focus of many technology providers to the financial services arena for the last few years. So the abundance of pre- and post-trade transparency and a tiered reporting environment is likely, in our own opinion, to push firms towards a more sophisticated use of data, where we are also seeing data and analytics now being key in achieving MIFID II compliance. This is where voice solutions are providing unique benefits right across the spectrum of in-scope firms, which we do expect to rise exponentially in the coming months and years for a variety of reasons, not least of all MIFID II. So, looking a bit deeper, for those that weren't aware of Article 16.7 or those that won't be ready, what is the extension? What conversations now must firms record? So you can see on the presentation in front of you, firms must record conversations and electronic communications that are in scope of Article 16.7. It's pretty detailed. We've got the relevant sections a few slides later. But in other words, all conversations, either audio or electronic, or messages, that are expected or intended to result in transactions when dealing an own account and the provision of client order services that relate to the reception, transmission and execution of orders. Some communications that occur while firms provide, for instance, corporate finance services, they may fall within MIFID II taping requirements. That's a specific query for each individual firm. The focus on recording is on the end of the process. As I mentioned, it's leading to a transaction where the transaction is agreed there and then, or there's a reasonable prospect of the transaction being agreed. There's a few examples. The third item there you can see is the capital raising context. There will be conversations and communications between, for instance, syndicate banks, issues and other investors' clients about pricing and allocation of securities. And there is a number of additional communications that also may fall into MIFID II taping requirements. I would be happy to provide a list of those if anyone wanted them, specifically for the people that won't be ready or those that aren't aware of the exact requirements of 16.7. Finishing off with this slide before we move forward, Article 25 actually imposes an obligation to maintain transactional data, as Brian mentioned earlier, and make it available to regulators on request for a period of 5 years. We'll touch on how we actually do that when we get to the management console and dashboard and show you how effective the oversight and other information, management information, is available through the systems. So, what's new? What are the main points? If we now look, and Brian and myself have diligently worked through Article 16.7, and we've come up with 7 of the main points that we feel actually apply to all in-scope firms. We'll briefly highlight them here before we step through them later on in the presentation. The first is Article 16.7, subparagraph 1, where investment firms are required to establish and implement as well as maintain an effective recording of telephone and electronic communications. Now, many are doing this, and I expect quite a lot of people on the webinar is doing this, but possibly not to the extent required under MIFID II. We'll touch on that as we go through. The second is subparagraph 2 of 16.7, which basically directs firms to ensure that the management body has effective oversight and control over the policies and procedures relating to the firm's recording of telephone conversations. Now, quite a lot of questions appear from this, or arise from this, and that is, what is effective oversight, and how can this be achieved? This is something, again, we'll be touching on in a few slides' time. The next one, and I think this is relevant for everyone, everything must be technology neutral, and effectively, there must be a periodic evaluation of the effectiveness of any solution that is actually implemented, i.e. it must be capable on a proportional and risk basis to provide the necessary requirements for MIFID II. The next is subparagraph 6, and anyone can actually email you a link of this later to actually reference these articles. This is again applies to the requirements of all transactions and orders, and as I mentioned, must be risk-based and proportionate. The next one is the ability for firms to demonstrate the policies and procedures and management oversight of the recording rules to the relevant competent authorities upon request. This is something that is creating a particular challenge for quite a lot of firms who have the standard call recording through maybe a third-party service provider. And the problem actually arises when they actually go to provide this information to either the client or the regulator, as we know, which is a key tenet of MIFID II. Almost at the end, second from last, is the notification before provision of services. So all calls must start with a notification that it's being recorded and it's available for a period of 5 years. Technology has now moved to actually make compliance a real-time solution, which means that you can actually get a green light, and we'll talk about this as we work through. So not only can we detect in keyword search, but we can actually notify you of a compliant call before you take the next steps. So that is a big one for many. And finally, storage, security and accessibility on request with quality, accuracy and completeness. So a lot of people store off-site or possibly in a cloud. This must actually allow for the audio to be replayed or copied, and it must be retained in a format that does not allow the original record to be altered or deleted. So this is, again, a very important area of the call recording requirements for MIFID II.
Sean, you've covered a lot of new responsibilities there. Who will the new responsibilities and regulations affect?
Yeah, absolutely. The MIFID II, as we've seen, has got a wider scope. Many more firms are added. You can see on the screen in front of you now, everything from stockbrokers, financial advisors, through to banks, service companies, investment managers. There's quite a lot of in-scope firms, too many to detail on the one slide, but again, the catchment has increased significantly, and again, this may lead to almost half of the people or the respondents in the first question not being aware of exactly what 16.7 is. So I think that's a very important area where I think people who are in regulated firms should possibly take a look. I think the scenario is, if you're a regulated firm, it must apply until you rule yourself out.
So what is the current situation within scope firms?
Okay, so as I just highlighted, some people and some firms, have absolutely no recording ability in place at all. This is likely to be the new in-scope firms, but although there is some firms that have been previously regulated that are actually looking at this now. So a unique situation where we sit is that some firms don't have any recording, and that makes it absolutely a priority for these firms to look at this now. In addition to that, we have firms that do have some sort of recording ability. They seek an improved solution, so something where they realise that the current processes, as I alluded to earlier, are insufficient for MIFID II compliance. So they're looking for, right now as we speak, a real-time recording and analytics solution. These are the people that are looking at technology to come in and solve problems for them. And again, some of these people on the webinar might be relevant, as why we might see them here. In addition to that, we have other firms that do have some recording procedures, but it's limited to some transactions. As we highlighted, one of the sections of MIFID II is the identification. It's actually Section 2 of Article 16.7, where you must identify all relevant conversations in electronic communications. So it's actually increasing the scope and making sure that all conversations that's related to that trade or the construction of that is actually captured. We then move on to those that have partial recording, similar to what I just mentioned, and have a manual, partially monitored process. Again, partial monitoring, the question arises, is that sufficient for MIFID II compliance? I think given the scope of the articles and the depth of MIFID II, that would have to be a no. Nothing other than full monitoring, full compliance, and the ability to monitor all calls will be sufficient for MIFID II, which is my understanding. And finally, we have those that are recording all required calls, again with a manual process, either partial or complete, with some sort of business intelligence or reporting. These are primarily the firms that we see as the small percentage that Brian alluded to at the start of the webinar of 36% that feel that they will be ready for MIFID II compliance. This is where I feel the remaining 60+% need to focus. Again, as Brian highlighted, we're only a few weeks away from the implementation of MIFID II, so it's probably a priority.
So what have been some of the historical issues and limitations?
This is probably one of the, for anyone working in financial services, especially in the compliance section, the ability to effectively reconstruct any trade conversation is an often time-consuming, laborious process, specifically if it's to highlight one specific issue or a comment or something that might or might not have been said. Again, this is particularly relevant for the people that actually have the task of going to do this. The next the next issue, is the inability, as we highlighted, to monitor 100% of all related transactions with the current processes that are deployed internally. This, as we know, and the third point, has actually been somewhat of a reactive process as opposed to a proactive compliance department. What that essentially highlights is that issues that do arise normally arise from complaints, and only then do we understand that there has been an issue or is an issue, and there could be further issues if this is inherent throughout the company. Technology today can actually highlight these issues, which we will touch on in a few slides, and actually identify and spot trends so that you can actually take action immediately. Furthermore, call transcripts has typically, again, been very laborious. Anyone who writes suitability reports or is working within compliance will know this to be the case. The audio and any conversations that actually take place through the trade process can actually be transcribed. So all audio can be transcribed into text and can be added to the actual compliance form or suitability report, should that be deemed relevant. Again, looking at something else that will see the rise of voice technology within financial services, it is the market abuse regulations, where you can actually keep track, if we go back to the LIBOR issues that we experienced before, exactly what was being said and by whom. And again, part of the new regulations account for offences such as merely attempted insider dealing. So that is something that again is particularly relevant and these solutions are addressing. Historical issues with compliance, implementation of new products and new solutions is resource and time intensive and can disrupt business. And probably one of the most important ones at the bottom is the periodical training or upskilling of agents or employees. These are all benefits. Again, there's probably specific benefits that each firm could actually obtain from that. But these are the main historical issues and limitations that we've seen from the current processes within financial services, particularly compliance. So I think with that, we are ready for our second poll question. So back to Philip.
So thanks, Sean. And does the level of technology currently available for call recording meet the future requirements of MIFID II, Article 16.7? So does the level of technology currently available for call recording meet the future requirements of MIFID II, Article 16.7? So was that, what was the genesis of this question? What was the reason, Brian and Sean, for...
Well, it was essentially what we find from the many companies that we speak with, and that's that many people believe that they have the appropriate processes in place, only to find out later that they don't. And when you look at the actual subparagraphs of MIFID II 16.7, it actually details that companies must go further, and we'll touch on that in a few slides, but they must actually not only make them aware, identify the relevant conversations, but also provide these calls and these transcribed calls, not only for regulatory purposes, but to the client on request. Right. Conversations around on request are actually taking place now. But it's clear that old processes and the compliance of, well, the current processes are clearly insufficient for MIFID II.
Yeah.
Again, this the replies to the question is typical of what we see. A lot of people believe that their processes are suitable. Yeah. And those are the people that I would possibly look to read Article 16.7 in a bit more detail.
So are we finding that compliance risk managers, auditors are digging through the weeds of their organisations, technology and or lack of it, and thinking, hang on a second, Houston, we've got a problem here?
Yeah. Well, I think overall, because MIFID is so far-reaching, it's so deep, and if you look at the size, and it's mind-boggling the size and the effect it's going to have on the markets. Areas like call recording mightn't appear to be as much of an issue until there's an issue. So this is a highlight and pulling out one of the things that we're finding as a key issue for a lot of people that understand that, you know, when they read this section of MIFID II, that they actually need to do something about it. Yeah. So it can get lost in the mire of MIFID II, as it were.
And I'm just wondering whether maybe this will come up in the questions that we'll be discussing later, but do project managers of MIFID II really have this as quadrant one, or is it literally just it's consumed in the other details of project management?
Definitely the latter. And this again is why we're doing this webinar today, to highlight this. You know, we're a few weeks away. There's been the delay, as Brian alluded to earlier, had mentioned that you know, we're a year past everything else, and from the people that we're speaking to, the companies that we're directly involved with, we're hearing that around MIFID II, as we come up to Christmas, a lot of people won't be taking their Christmas holidays. It's all hands on deck, and they're focusing on other areas of MIFID II to the detriment of this section here. But the good thing about this is that even if this solution was implemented post MIFID II, post January the 3rd, this is actually not only real-time, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also historical. So any audio file you can import into this technology, and it will actually retrospectively check any calls or any audio source at all. So you can be actually MIFID II compliant on the 3rd of January, but implemented in February or March, for instance.
Okay, right.
So talking about technology, how is that new speech technology helping our colleagues?
Okay, so as we have seen and as we've talked about, speech technologies is definitely the way forward for quite a lot of businesses, but it's especially prevalent in financial services. So key things such as automation, process improvement, RPA, has taken a central role in helping optimizing workflows and providing greatly enhanced benefits to these companies. Compliance is essentially no different. With many of the processes that feed into compliance being automated, the natural conclusion was that compliance is also automated. The benefits are sizable, and as we look, and just touching on a few points that's been talked about already, this can be done in real time. So as a conversation is taking place, the conversation can actually be not only transcribed but analysed in real time. And as I mentioned just a few seconds ago at the end of the last question, retrospectively. On any audio file at all. This is particularly popular with any firm that's looking to mitigate any past risk or address any concerns or possible issues that they may have had internally about bad advice, mis-selling, or any issues around pricing, etc. Again, this can take to detect who said what and when, all time stamped, and it can ensure basically 100% compliance. It's a sizable move from what current existing processes are, where maybe spot checks are done or a few files are actually pulled each and every month based on a specific advisor. The audio recordings that actually are rules-based and tied to the scripts can actually be made available, and additional sort of solutions around verifying identity. So not only can we actually pull different things from the actual audio, but you can be verified, and some people may see this in some of the financial services companies in the UK. You can be verified by biometric voice print, which actually is creates a lot more security, and again can confirm, for instance, in a trade floor, someone is allowed to take a certain trade or make a trade or place a trade. Very valuable for financial companies. As we touched on, transcribing the call, so you can actually look at specific issues of business intelligence, and again we're going to touch on that in a slide or two's time. And you can actually profile and pull quite a lot of information from audio calls, insight that has historically never been available. This can all be found and pulled in a graphical dashboard, which I'll show you an example of in a few seconds. Just touching on the biometric identification. You can see here some of the benefits of that, which is passively and non-intrusively can verify identity in real time. This is a pretty unique solution, and again this takes away and saves quite a lot of time and frustration, so we say, from security details on calls. It actually checks the voice print as an additional measure against a list of fraudsters, or people who are not authorised, in this case, to trade or provide the relevant advice, and takes the appropriate action. Other information like sentiment analysis, it can detect the emotional status of both parties. Was this person stressed? Were they actually in a position to take the actual trade? Did they mean it, I suppose? And again, leading into the dashboard. It's a web-based dashboard. It's intuitive and it's very easy to use. So, inside the solution and how it works, I've kept this very, very simple because it is essentially very, very simple. So, natural language understanding, speech recognition, in a sense, can actually identify keywords and can find these and compare them against any compliance rules or scripts in any audio file at all. What it then does is it can interpret the reason for the call, who said what, how it was said, and when. Was there an inflection there? There's certain things that did they actually mean what they said? I think the point of it there. That's how advanced the system is. Detects and timestamps each of the events. for instance, price communication. This is particularly valuable. Again, Article 16.7, subparagraph 10 states that it must be secure and it must be time-stamped and not editable in any form. So you can actually prove best execution, best price if you're a broker with an audio timestamp and verification as well. It can detect the quality of service provided, again based on the specific needs of the business. And as we touched on, it transcribes the entire call or part of it and makes that available for other reports or again business intelligence data mining. And should there be an issue, should you identify that something has been said that shouldn't have been said, was a certain area of the call queried or non-compliant, it can actually prompt an alert in real time, and it can actually push that audio for further analysis to a senior manager or a compliance member. Again, historically, this would have been lost, and the only chances of finding it would have been through a spot check or if someone else had actually overheard it. Now, you can actually be alerted in real time to any issues that there might be and actually take the appropriate action, again, mitigating any risk.
Sean, we've taken a look inside the solution, so I wonder if you could just give us some high-level views of what the immediate benefits are, please.
Absolutely. The immediate benefits, as we have briefly highlighted, is that every single interaction can instantly be analysed. And effectively, this is dependent on the department with any rules-based analysis, which is different, as Brian mentioned earlier, for credit card sections, for loans, for wealth management. So whatever the rules are for that, they can be input into the system, and it can actually work off those rules. And it can be very easily updated as these rules actually change. So gone are the 400-page compliance manuals, and are the rules-based analysis that's actually input into the system. Very simple, very straightforward, and again, immensely helpful. The second one is that it is a continuous, always-on compliance solution. What we actually see is that this is creating the right environment for the companies that have already deployed this. It's more, the compliance function turns to an almost self-regulating solution or environment. It's proactive analysis as they speak, so we're finding that people are more aware of it. And if it's something that actually can be detected and picked up immediately, that flags as an issue, they're more likely to stay away from it. Again, mitigating risk and fraud internally. And again, always available for audit purposes or any reviews should it be needed. One of the big benefits is that within Europe, MIFID II applies right across Europe. It's available on multiple languages, so it doesn't really matter if you're speaking to someone from a trade floor in Germany to the UK. It's actually adaptable, and it covers all the languages.
On that note, we have a couple of questions in, Sean,
sure.
which I think that would be quite worthwhile introducing the colleagues as well from Spitch to answer these.
Sure.
Is the speaker identified by his voice, or is the identification channel based?
So that can happen on both ways. So we can recognise the telephone number that's called in, but we can also recognise the person's voice as well. So that's independent of any telephone number that they may be calling in on. Yeah. So we can recognise voice and other caller attributes. Okay.
And linked to that, do you mean the software recognises the voices? Can that be attributed? Can you attribute them to a particular colleague?
Software does recognise voices, and it can be attributed to colleagues.
Okay. And is sentiment analysis word-based, or is it based on customer voice?
Okay, it's also word-based, but we can also look at sentiment analysis based on emotion as well. You can detect emotion in speech patterns, and our software can pick that up as well.
Okay, right.
Okay, thanks for the questions. Hopefully those answers were helpful. And just to finish off on this slide, additional benefits are that you can identify risks and emerging trends and take action. It's extremely cost effective, and it's a fully monitored transaction. And in certain areas like trade floors and other, like for instance retail, it eliminates fraud almost entirely. That's the voice biometrics element of it. Again, many more benefits that we could actually talk about. So here we have an example of what the management console or dashboard will actually look like, or may look like. Now, I have to stress this is a generic solution, and this is only to give you an idea. So hopefully you can see on your screen, to the left there is the menus and the navigation panes, and along the top you can see that there is certain pie charts. Now this can be 1, 2, 3, 4. It's solely dependent on what each individual firm needs. In this case, this firm wanted an overview on the top left. There's a snapshot, or a snap chart if you want, by agent. It also details queries, activity, actionables, sector, and resolved. So again, this could lead to any area of compliance that you actively take, which is the main areas for yourself. This is, again, is purely just to give you an idea. The middle one looks at the area. So we identified with this client that there was some concerns around notification disclosure, as well as cancellation and suitability. And this is one of the trends that was spotted without this software, but this actually monitored and improved it from that point on. And on the right, you can actually see that there's a detailed case review. How many of these interactions are compliant? How many were deemed non-compliant? How many do I need to review? How many are resolved? And what trends is the software spotting based on the rules analysis? Below that, you can actually see there's an area where you can search. This can be done by time, it can be done by agent, it can be done by extension. Furthermore, it can be done by keywords. You can actually type a keyword into the system and it will pull it back from any audio. And below that, you can actually play it, flag it or comment on it directly from the agent. There's additional management information available there. Again, that's specific to the setup. So looking a bit more in depth, this is actually now when we've identified and pulled the call through. The keywords that you can actually see, which hopefully are on your screen, they're not financial services specific, because we wouldn't be able to share any of that with you. So we give you some examples here. So the audio you can actually see running right the way through at the top of the call. There's certain areas that have been, certain phrases that have been picked up, and you can actually click on that and have a fully transcribed section, which I'll show you in a few seconds. Furthermore, you can actually separate what the agent said and what the client said, and you can actually apply certain rules to that or additional rules to that, and that is again highlighted at the bottom of the screen with the relevant sections of the time frame and the section of speech from each. Finally, keeping it simple, this is if I was to click on any of the keywords that were spotted, it takes me directly to the area of the call and the transcribed data. Additionally, you can actually have specific or sensitive data automatically redacted from this. Again, that's vitally important for some areas of financial services. That can happen again, as I say, automatically. And to the right of that, you can see word cloud. So this is set up based on your own requirements. So it could be around cancellation, it could be around disclosure, whatever is relevant for you. And by clicking on those words, it pulls forward any conversations and the relevant part of the transcript or the audio where that was actually mentioned. So again, that's a very brief insight into what is a very sophisticated system. But hopefully that helps you understand a bit more about how this solution works in comparison to how you may be undertaking some compliance structures or compliance queries at the moment.
Thanks, Sean. I think that's a good time to hand over to Philip for the next poll question.
Okay. So have your organisational policies adapted to facilitate the required monitoring and potential dissemination of recorded information? So have your organisational policies adapted to facilitate the required monitoring and potential dissemination of recorded information? If you could answer either yes, no, or don't know on the choices and options below, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay. So 66% don't know, 22% yes, no 11%.
Again, pretty typical of what we're seeing, specifically around Article 16.7. I would draw the people that said no and don't know, which is the vast majority, to subparagraph 10 of Article 16.7. That will hopefully give you a bit more insight into the exact requirements. And 20% of the people that have actually adapted, that's slightly above what we have seen. So that's great.
Okay.
So moving on now, what's the business value here? So what does all of this deliver? Well, basically, vastly improved regulatory toolkit, and really the value is actually difficult to put into monetary terms, because the old saying goes, if you think compliance is expensive, you should try non-compliance. We've seen earlier how automation is providing huge benefits that will be beyond reach prior to where we are now. Luckily, those benefits are now becoming more commonplace. The main case is a greatly enhanced regulatory toolkit. We've looked at the processes, the limitations and the issues that remain. Now there is the possibility to gain real-time insight into your compliance department with fully automated oversight and complete 100% coverage and insight into every interaction. So with a short time to market and with some very clear, easy steps from the list, and to support that message, benefits in terms of self-discipline and very easy and simple, straightforward deployment. So we can go from easy to install and integrate, plug and play, and be operational within a matter of weeks or months, providing a very short time to market. I think we'll move on now, and it's time, Philip, for another poll, our last poll, which is poll number 4.
Okay. Do you believe the proposed solutions meet your organisational requirement to maintain compliance relating to MIFID Article 17.7? So, do you believe the proposed solutions meets your organisational requirement to maintain compliance relating to MIFID II Article 17.7? If you'd just like to answer one of the options below, that'd be great. Okay, right. Okay. 50% saying yes, we have all the information needed. 50% said, I'd like to come and dine over croissants to discuss further details.
We've lots of croissants.
There. So, okay. And again, are there still issues of clarity that firms and or individuals still need to understand so that they're reporting correctly to senior managers about MIFID II compliance? Or is it Spitch's opinion that senior managers responsible for either project leading or for the implementation of MIFID are fully aware of their compliance, the expectations of multiple jurisdictional regulators?
I think that there's potentially a gap in the second piece where the full implications of the regulatory text hasn't been applied to their various work areas.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that. Furthermore, I believe that with such a seismic change and the regulation, that the 50% that would like to come and meet us for breakfast will actually look, we'll talk about it in a lot more detail. What we've provided here is essentially an overview with the relevant points and how new technology and solutions can address them. There's much more to it than that. And this goes right across the entire organisation, be that a small building society or be that a huge investment bank.
But there's a question of actually you not knowing is not an answer anymore, is it?
Absolutely, and disclosure, MIFID II actually sets out that the disclosure can no longer be used as a means of defence. So this is, again, with the amount of people that fear they will not be in a position to be compliant, you're absolutely right. If you're not aware, you don't know, but that's no defence.
Yeah. Ignorance is not mitigation.
Yeah, in fact, the fines that have been imposed for this are sizable, and I think there's going to be an early case of probably making an example of some firms to actually show how serious they are about this MIFID II. And I wouldn't want to be one of those firms.
So we've only got, say heads up, we've only got 8 minutes left to answer your questions as well as to get a full answer from Brian and his colleagues as well.
Great. So I think we should just conclude there to look and say that basically the regulations are about recording, monitoring and reporting order-related transactions regardless of the channel used. Providing the recording service, usually part of the telephone platform, is implemented, this is much more to do for compliance. Monitoring and reporting require a thorough analysis of an enormous quantity of audio and data. Adopting speech technology is an excellent way to automate the analysis, combine the results in a meaningful interface, and reduce time, effort, fraud, cost, and the risk of non-compliance. So we've got a few people in the room and around the world standing by to answer your questions.
Okay, we have one in. Sean would like to go through this. It's rather technical, but achievable for the brains that we have remotely and also in the room.
Okay, so the question is, and I'm going to pass this to our technical guys, I'll read it out, they'll give a much better insight. Could Spitch product licenses be used in multi-tenants mode? Namely, we have several business units in our organisation in which speech analytics can help. Once purchased for MIFID II compliance purposes, can we use them for plain transcription of sentiment analysis in our CE department?
Well, that's an in-depth question. I'm going to hand that straight over to our technical lead, Vadim.
Basically, the basic licenses for automatic speech recognition or for voice biometric could be used in multi-tenants mode, of course. So the number of ports or number of transactions we can use, it's only the matters of capacity, yeah. But for compliance or for sentiment analysis, we also provide with some specific add-ons which could be used only in the department you need it.
Okay. Another question that we've had is that can solutions like what you're suggesting detect insider trading?
That's a very good question. Now, you can actually load the system with not only words to detect, but also alert words. So essentially, based on the solution, yes. If you can identify certain words or phrases, and plus sentiment can be pulled from the audio itself, it can actually go some way to actually alerting you and detecting you to possible insider trading, yes.
Okay. I mean, we obviously have a number of attendees overseas dialed into this webinar as well. Is it full compliance with the expectations of regulators in different jurisdictions, for example, Switzerland and other other countries?
So can we bring in Jörg, who is one of our colleagues based in the DAC region, to answer that question?
Yes, this is Jörg speaking. Yes, this solution is fully compliant to what is required in Switzerland, and we can solve all the needs here in Switzerland as well.
That's down to the FINMA requirements, yes?
Yes, exactly.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jörg. Just being passed another question. This is a very relevant one, actually. We see this a lot. How do you manage the local dialects? In Italy, we have lots of them and still haven't found one that completely solves this issue. There's a very relevant point that I think, Brian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, we've successfully dealt with dialects and different languages in the past. I think we're one of the few companies, or the only company, that can handle Swiss Deutsch as a language. Why is that relevant? Well, Swiss Deutsch isn't actually a written language, it's a spoken language. So I think that goes part of the way to demonstrate our capabilities around handling different languages and also different dialects within that language as well.
Yeah. So the dialects, can you track or pick up sentiment even from the dialects, the different dialects?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Just wrapping up, we've only got a few minutes left. So wrapping up, is in your opinion, based upon the polls, and so if we took the first poll there, what comfort can we give to organisations who are perhaps the 80% there, not unlikely to be ready? No, I do not know the requirements there. What's the sort of what is the crumbs of comfort with 4 or 5 weeks to go that we could support?
This is something we touched on earlier. Now, for those that are unlikely to be ready, the time is to start planning now, I suppose, looking at exactly the relevant data we've talked about. For those that don't know of the requirements, this again is one of the main reasons why we decided with UK Finance to run this webinar. This is one of the key issues that we're finding for people within the overall MIFID II regulation that is posing some issues. It's actually a fairly easy one to solve. Now, in terms of the ones that's unlikely to be ready or what they don't know what it is, as I mentioned earlier, if you're recording calls now, we're not going to say install a new recording system, but this technology is plug and play. So you can retrospectively look back at any calls, for instance, from the 3rd of January, when MIFID II is actually implemented, and actually ensure compliance from that point forward, irrespective, as I mentioned earlier, if you actually go live with the solution or if you actually implement the solution a month or 2 later. So the crumbs of comfort would be that there is a solution. It's very simple. It's probably the easiest area of MIFID II to actually address. And it's the most far-reaching and will ensure that you have complete coverage of all transactional conversations.
Well, we've run out of time. It's been very insightful. Thank you very much for our presenters. Thank you very much to Spitch for supporting us and informing member organisations, and also to other organisations who have dialed in across multi-jurisdictions as well. It's great to see there's coverage and oversight and interest in these subject areas at UK Finance. For those member organisations, we do have a working group, MIFID working group. If you'd like further details of that, you can contact me, philip.allen@ukfinance.org.uk, and it's supporting member banks actually who are engaged in this process or need greater understanding, greater insights in a knowledge-sharing environment that we host at UK Finance. And so if you're not participating in that, and we can supply you with details of Rob Driver, who leads that initiative there. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.